Before we begin, a disclaimer: this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon as the basis for any investment decision. Nothing you hear is an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any security. The securities discussed on this podcast may be owned by persons being interviewed. Before making any investment decision, please consult an investment advisor.
I'm going to start.
Okay, you're going to start. Okay,
yeah. Right. So David,
yes.
I was reading your piece on booking versus Airbnb, and this is something that really stuck out. So you said, if you're younger than 35 and pitching a travel stock, I'm like 95% sure the stock is Airbnb. Hey, I'm 34 years old,
No, I mean, this is great because, this is why I'm glad we're talking about these two companies side by side, because I think one of these two companies gets so much more attention than the other, unfairly in my estimation. Because when it comes to the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
Booking, it's around twice the size of Airbnb. They have, roughly twice the room nights, twice the gross bookings, twice the market cap. And yet when it comes to mind share, I feel like, especially on Twitter, I'd say that Booking gets like 1/20th the attention that Airbnb does.
And, you know why, right? You know why? Because Pinterest is, so, it's pretty clear. Pinterest is probably, less than 35 years old on a weighted average basis. And you got me. Like, I am 34 years old and I own Airbnb. So you got me. Like, end of story. We don't have to babble for the next hour or so.
Yeah, and I happen to own Booking, just full disclosure there.
So the boomers in this conversation own Booking, and the younger folks, who are dominating FinTwit and all, we own Airbnb. So
That's right.
Booking it is. Let's go.
Yeah, and I think the same dynamic kind of applies to like Stripe versus Adyen, by the way. So like both companies have similar transaction volumes, but Stripe gets 20 times the attention. I think like everyone knows who the
It's not
CEOs
even public. It's not even public.
Yeah, it's not even public. Yeah, so everyone knows who the CEOs of Airbnb and Stripe are. Right? But I wonder how many could name the CEOs of Booking and Adyen. And I think this is just so emblematic of this narrative flywheel that characterizes Silicon Valley companies. Like A16Z is obviously the masters at this, right? They're like part media company, part VC. But storytelling, it's everywhere in Silicon Valley. Right? It's not enough just to be a founder. You also need to be a thought leader. You have guys like Brian Chesky and the Collison brothers who are like doing the podcast rounds and sounding off on various issues, right?
And people in tech, founder mode.
Founder mode. And people in tech, they eat this up, right? Like the sound bites, they go viral on Twitter. And because people in tech become enamored of these names, Ben Thompson writes about them, which only further fuels the fire. And I'm reminded like how, in the book, the Airbnb story, there's this part where at one point Airbnb's founders were so broke and they're living on dry cereal or something. Yeah. And when Brian Chesky's mother urges him to like buy milk, he says, "No, we're just going to struggle through because this will make a better story one day." So this is very deliberate. Right? So I think the storytelling and the narrative have always been an important part of Airbnb's history. And in general, it tends to be a central feature of the growth formula for Silicon Valley startups, and it's worked. Like there's been at least 2 hagiographies written about Airbnb. I have yet to see a single book written about Booking. So,
anyway. Stop your boomer talk. Airbnb. It's not just story. It's not just narrative. The numbers back it up. We're going to talk about it.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Not ripping on Airbnb by any means. What they've done incredibly impressive.
Yeah, I think if you look at in the last 15 years or so, the companies that have been founded, I think post GFC or around that time. Well, if you exclude OpenAI, again, you can include OpenAI. I think Airbnb is probably the only company, or is the company that is generating highest, GAAP operating profit or free cash flow. Although their free cash flow number is kind of riddled with stuff that you need to adjust, right? Stock-based compensation, capital benefits, right? Stuff like that. But even if you adjust those, I think Airbnb is probably in the last 15 years or so, they are generating the highest let's say underlying profit versus any other company that's been founded in the last 15 or so years. So it is a special company. All the stories and all this sound like they get all this free, PR for good reasons. So
Yes, yes.
yeah,
Yeah, so
I
this
do
is
think
not meant to knock Airbnb. And
yeah.
by the way, what makes this even more impressive is that like the online travel space, it's just littered with dead bodies, right? Like Vacasa, Sonder, TripAdvisor,
Yep.
Trivago, like Expedia to hasn't done much over the last decade. I mean, so to succeed in this space at all, I think is an accomplishment in
Yeah, no,
itself. So
I do think, yeah, I'll mention more about what I really think. Some of the incredible fiats by Airbnb, not just like you mentioned, there are like plenty of dead bodies. It's a graveyard. If you look at the history of this industry, but also Airbnb really created. It's a two-sided marketplace, of course, but at one hand, it created unique supply and it also created unique demand, right?
mhm.
Uh, which I think is really incredible. Like, to do it only one side of the equation would be, pretty incredible. But to do it on the both side at such scale, I think, it is partly why, if not, mostly why they get all this attention. You don't
Yeah,
really see such companies every year or every even, 5 years or 10 years.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
talk about booking. We're going to start with the company that boomers love, and we'll then gradually transition to more Gen Z millennial types. So I'll represent the millennials. So yeah, let's talk about booking and just give you a brief overview what the business does, like where
Yeah,
they're strong
sure,
in
sure.
geographically and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so a good place to start, I guess, would be with its origins here. So before Booking was Booking, it was a US centered online travel agency called Priceline.
Uh,
So this is like William Shatner, name your price. I think people know what that is. And in the early 2000s, it made two back-to-back acquisitions in Europe. The first was Active Hotels in the UK, and then soon after that, they bought Booking, and they paid about $300 million for both of those combined, $135 million for just Booking. And now, of course, that $135 million acquisition of Booking that formed the basis of what the company is today. So
right.
it's a near entirety of Booking's total value, right? So
Wow.
if
I think it's
Booking
like
is
$180 billion market cap today. So
yeah, I
that's
think it's
pretty
180
amazing.
billion enterprise value, something like that, and maybe 80% of that, 90% of that value
Yeah.
is probably tied up in Booking, which they bought for 135 million bucks. And so, I mean, this
There's a
should
book to be
probably
written
be
here, David. You should probably write a book on booking.
it should be on the short list of like one of the all-time great acquisitions, I think,
Right,
right?
right.
And um, and so, I mentioned earlier how like there have been a lot of a lot of failures in the online travel space. I guess one question is, how has Booking sort of escaped that fate?
Mm,
And
mm.
I think there are a few things to point to. The first, and this is one thing that I think everyone understands, the European hospitality industry is very fragmented and therefore easier to aggregate than in the US where you have more hotel chains. So, like 60% of the rooms in Europe are supplied by independent hotels who aren't very sophisticated. They don't know how to run, sophisticated online ad campaigns, and they rely on Booking as a marketing channel to attract guests. And it's a classic two-sided network effect in that sense. I think this is probably less well recognized, but arguably as important, is that from the very beginning, experimentation has been a strong part of the Booking culture. So
Mm.
at any given time, this company is running, more than 1,000 tests to improve conversion and click-through rates and time on site. And they
Wow.
have all kinds of infrastructure and templates to democratize the process. So it's a very flat culture. So anyone at the company, even very low-level employees, can run tests on their own. And when people are hired, they're trained on statistics and designing experiments. And all the results of these experiments are visible to everyone at the company.
Mm.
And the reason I point this out and why I think it's important is that because historically Booking has been very dependent on paid search results from
Right.
Google
Yep.
for leads, and they still are, but to a lesser extent than I think they've been historically. And if you're paying Google to acquire customers, then you need to be the best at conversion. You need to be the
Right.
best at the bottom funnel. And so,
Yes.
because your ad placement, it's not just a function of how much money you pay, but also how relevant your listing is, because there's a quality score. And so, and so, like, the knock on booking has has long been like this dependence on Google. I think the bear case has long been that Google would eventually vertically integrate into travel bookings,
Right.
because Google had acquired ITA software in 2011 that became Google Flights, and then they started to replace the paid blue links with widgets,
Yeah.
and they would obscure the name of the OTA, so you couldn't tell which OTA was actually providing the listing.
Right.
And so the idea was that Google would eventually take over bookings role.
Mm.
And I found this thesis flimsy for the following reasons. First, travel was, and it might still be, Google's largest source of search ad revenue. So like when I
Yeah.
wrote my post, I thought that Booking spent maybe $4 billion on Google. It's probably closer to 5 or 6 billion, my guess would be today. And that's, like free money as far as Google is concerned. It leverages Google's
Right.
infrastructure.
Right.
So it didn't make sense to me that they would compromise that revenue, that pure incremental margin, to take on the less scalable business of being an OTA, which involves a lot of like customer support and supplier support functions.
So basically, you are saying Google currently probably the money that Google receives from Booking, Expedia, and other companies like that is probably like, I don't know, 80-90%, right? And versus,
Yeah.
let's say they basically try to become just another OTA out there. They'll need support. They'll need, like, a lot more employees, overhead, and Booking makes like what, 40% operating margin, right?
Yeah.
Around that. So let's assume Google will do better, because they have end-to-end control. They may do like 50%, but the hassle of like doing the entire end-to-end thing, managing the overheads, probably supersedes the benefits that come from controlling the end-to-end experience. Is that kind of your counter to the uh, potential risk that people cite about Google booking dependency on Google?
Yeah, that's right. I think economically it's not worth it. I think culturally they're just not geared that way as well. So yeah, like during COVID, for example, when hotels had to cancel a bunch
Yeah.
of reservations, it was like Booking in the background who was doing all of the refunds, right?
So they were
It's
on the hook for those refunds, not
Yeah,
the.
yeah. And so I always thought like a more reasonable interpretation, compared to Google moving down the funnel or the more reasonable interpretation of like why Google was like moving down the funnel with these widgets and these new ad formats, was not that they want to control the transaction. It's more that
uh,
they want to control the customer relationship. Like they want to limit Booking's role to being a back end function. And by the way, these new ad formats and widgets were basically fine for Booking, because like, yeah, they were paying up for to be listed, but those ads also happen to convert at a higher rate. I always just saw this as like a synergistic partnership, and I didn't really see a strong reason why that would change. But having said that, they were starting to see some ROI compression on their Google spend.
uh,
And I think all else equal, you don't want to just be the booking engine. You want to own as much of the top of funnel
right.
if you can. Um, and so at the same time that Google was getting better at owning the guests, so was Booking, right? So they started to push more guests directly to their app. They launched a loyalty program. They tried to create this idea of a connected trip where you just rely on Booking for all parts of your vacation. So not just the hotel, but the flight, the car from the airport to the hotel, your dinner reservation, your tours. And so, yeah, so like a classic example that Glenn Fogel often gives is, you book your flight, and you book your dinner reservation
Yeah.
on Booking. Your flight is delayed, and then Booking knows to push your dinner reservation back or reserve a table at a different restaurant, that kind of thing. And so to make that happen, they had to stitch. So to stitch this all together, they had to do some things in the background. They had to take more control of the payments so they could cross subsidize across different products and give preferential rates to loyalty members, and also accept more payment options. And then they had to be able to distribute funds to all the different suppliers. So you need to control the payment. You need to be in more direct control of the payments flow to do that. And they also had to move more towards a merchant model and away from an agency model. And so I'll just briefly explain what
Sure.
this
Yeah.
means. So like, um, so in the agency model, booking connects the guest to the hotel,
Hmm.
but the guest pays the hotel directly when they show up for the reservation. And then sometime later, the hotel then pays booking a commission.
I
Okay.
see.
So this is how booking started. And it caused major cash flow problems for them
Right.
early on
Yeah.
because you're spending money up front to
Yep.
acquire the customer, but you're not collecting the commission until much later, maybe months down the line after the
Uh,
guest has stayed at the hotel.
yep.
Um, in the merchant model, customers pay the OTA directly for the room. And then the OTA passes the funds, the wholesale rate of the rooms to the hotel down the road. So it's much better from a cash flow perspective, right?
Right.
Because booking's
Yep.
getting paid up front. And booking doesn't take inventory risk for this, by the way. I think I've heard it said that like, typically under this model, OTAs, they're on the hook for some unsold inventory. And I think in very rare cases, booking might be as well, but for the most part, it's not taking inventory risk on these rooms.
Which
And
one
so
was a better model for the hotels, let's say? Was it the earlier model or was it the current model is actually
I don't
good for
actually
them?
know that it changes the cash flows from them all that much
Right.
because in
Yeah.
the agency model, they're not getting paid until like the way it works in Europe is you pay the hotel um, after your stay. And so
Right.
while you're checking out, that's when you pay.
Yes.
Um, and so they're getting the cash. So they're getting cash pretty late from the time of the actual booking in both cases. I don't think it changes things that much from their perspective. It does for the consumer, I think. The consumer is paying up front.
Right.
Uh, right.
And it also is a better deal for booking because of
Mhm.
the cash flow.
Yes.
It's kind of matching where when they're acquiring the customers and when they're actually getting paid. So that mismatch of cash flow that used to exist before,
Yes.
that's not a problem anymore. I want to go back to some of the stuff that you said about Google. I just want to spend a little more time on that particular dynamic. So, what percentage of bookings, current traffic, or demand comes from Google? I
Like
mean,
more than half of their
guesstimate half.
more than half no, hold on. More than half of their bookings come direct now.
Okay.
So it's about 60% of their bookings now come direct.
Direct is
Um
60%. And do you
yes.
have a guess what it used to be, let's say 5 years ago?
Probably a bit under 50. I mean, been a pretty gradual ramp
Right.
over time.
I guess my observation or point about this particular dynamic is that I think Google and Booking used to be sort of symbiotic relationship for a long time, for the last, let's say, I don't know, 15, 20 years. So it was a very symbiotic relationship. But as Booking gets like closer to have like direct relationship with the customers or consumers. So today
Yeah.
is, let's say, 55, 60%. Let's say let's play it another 5 years, 10 years, so it becomes, let's say, 70%, right? Then shouldn't this relationship between Google and Booking be more adversarial in nature? Like Google may think, hey, it used to be more symbiotic. Now you guys only pay for the 30% of the traffic, and you kind of gradually evolve the business to become more direct traffic. And okay, so the game is over. We are now going direct. We are becoming the OTA, and we're going to kind of be, yes, it's a difficult business to kind of build. It's more support intensive, but there's enough money involved here, and we enough money involved here to be interested for us to be interested in becoming an OTA, like full-fledged OTA, because that's where the AI stuff can also come into play, right? Like I don't have a clear understanding what exactly those support people do, but if they could be like their role could be automated by AI, like
Yeah.
Google is building the probably it's
Well, so I think there with AI, um, it's kind of both um, an opportunity and a risk.
Uh-huh.
And it's hard to know how this, but here are a few different scenarios that you can imagine playing out here. One is like you use um, the AI powered, trip planner inside the booking app. And this is powered by OpenAI, by the way. But
Right.
the idea here is like, Booking has um, tons of travel relevant data. Um, they know your travel related preferences and are therefore in the best position to plan trips and book rooms and planes and whatever else you need. And they
Yeah.
also have the loyalty program, which is now like, 30% of their bookings come from level one, level two rewards members, and they can control the payments layer. So it can take any payment method that the customer uses. And then the second scenario, though, is that you have AI agents. You have kind of this AI meta layer across apps. So, and not just travel. So, for instance, um, even with like Uber and Lyft, like, okay,
Right.
you'll ask your agent, I need to get to address XYZ, find me the fastest ride, right? And it'll kind of like look across, Lyft and Uber to surface that for you. And there's a similar deal here with travel, where rather than log into the booking app, you ask the agent to plan your trip for you, and the agent will traverse the entire web. It'll look at Booking, Expedia, but also like all of the individual hotel sites, and then put together this highly tailored itinerary. Now, a better why might this be a better alternative than option one, using a dedicated app? Well, because it's more convenient, but also it may know more, like much more about you than the dedicated app ever could, because it'll have a memory of who you are and all your
Right.
preferences across
Yes.
the full span of daily activities, not just travel. So it'll know like, okay, you enjoy hiking and canoeing or whatever. So it might surface related activities when you're planning your trip. Um,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, and it's also worth noting that Booking recently announced a partnership with the OpenAI operator. So
Uh,
OpenAI, it's powering their internal chatbot, but they're also connected to their agent. And so in that second scenario where everything is agents interacting with websites, um, I think one possibility is that the relationship Booking has with OpenAI or whoever else runs these, whoever else ends up running these AI agents,
right.
um, is not too dissimilar to the one it currently has with Google, where like AIs control the top of the funnel
Uh,
and Booking functions as the transaction engine. I don't know that Booking's position in this context is as strong as an aggregator like Uber and Airbnb, because hotels are a different kind of supplier than a gig worker or people renting out a space for a
right.
bedroom. Because gig workers, they don't have a dedicated website or even a business, and their hours are kind of ad hoc. And so a gig worker, they need to be part of an aggregator. And that's not necessarily true of hotels. Like in theory, you might imagine an agent navigating countless hotel websites and just disintermediating the aggregators completely.
Yeah.
Um, Nevertheless, somebody has to handle uh, customer service. Somebody has to deal with payments, the fraud prevention, the cancellations and refunds, that kind of stuff. And so yeah, it's important to remember here that like Booking supplier, they're suppliers. They're like these small mom and pop hotels who are still like living in the Stone Age, right? They
Yeah.
aren't like these big chains like Marriott who have tons of resources to do this on their own. And the other thing they have going for them is that they can cross subsidize across a bundle of products and negotiate volume discounts, which isn't something you can do by putting together products in sort of a piecemeal way. And so it's possible that an open AI agent, leans on, let's say, Booking's trip planner to create like a tailored package on some parts of the itinerary, while
Uh,
also sourcing other parts of the itinerary outside of the booking complex, right? So it's kind of taking advantage of both things. Um, and so basically, like it's possible that the agents see Booking as like the most reliable or efficient way to finalize a transaction, because let's say Booking has better post-sale support or more structured interfaces or richer content. And so just as websites try to be like SEO friendly in the early days of search, maybe now we
right.
start to see them being more
Agent
AI
friendly.
agent friendly in some
Yeah.
way. And Booking should be able to do that better than an independent hotel can on their own. Um, so that's one scenario that plays out. But there's another where, like OpenAI, they handle the top, they handle like the top of funnel. They control that, but they're also able to transact directly with the hotels through like stable coins.
Yeah, I think in an agentic world, where agents basically dominate the, let's say, browsing on the internet, uh,
Yeah.
traffic to all these various websites, uh, it's possible that stablecoins can play a very, very interesting role in mediating these transactions, where the complexities around FX rates, different currencies, fraud and all that can uh, potentially go down. And I haven't really spent a lot of time on stable coins. I don't know exactly the benefits and the demerits. People obviously, a lot of AI companies or VCs spend a lot of time thinking about how whether these AI agents can complete a booking or a booking an accommodation or flight. Personally, like I do think like if it's possible, let's say I'm wearing a like an AR glass, right? And I can just, let's say I'm busy, I'm doing some work, and I can say, hey, just order an Uber, right? And my
Yeah.
the agent that's basically uh, embedded in my glass can just order an Uber, and it can show up on my like front door like in 5 minutes or whatever. And that's appealing to me because it's like a very high frequency transaction. Like, I'm doing it, let's say, every other day or every day if you're using Uber or
Mhm.
Lyft. But when I think of like, going somewhere, traveling somewhere, right, to a place, I feel like planning the, itinerary, planning the whole thing, uh, I think there is actually enough research on this topic. Like planning is actually core part of the enjoy that people get from the whole like experience, right? So I feel like when I think again, I can't speak for everybody else. I can speak only for myself. Uh, I don't expect myself to ask an agent to book a hotel in Italy or in, let's say, San Diego, right? Uh, like when I think, I actually, I actually want to see where I'm going to stay, and I want to kind of, the whole process of kind of, scrolling and like, okay, saying there are like 5 different options, 10 different options, I'm clicking and like looking through the photos. To me, that's enjoyable. That's not something I'm not like, repelled by that, right? I actually enjoy the process, right? So
Yeah.
I understand if it's like a, I don't know, like if you are a business traveler and let's say you're a consultant, you're basically on the road every week, right? And you know that you just want to stay on Marriott, let's say. Like, and yeah, that's for those transactions. I totally understand that, you may just rely on agents. The agents know exactly what you like, what's like, let's say your status on Marriott and all that. Like they can just fill up the whole thing and do a successful transaction. But for some like more like you are going for a trip, like with family or like with friends, and I just don't expect myself to completely outsource that sort of like experience to the AI agents. Sometimes you don't even know, like if you've never been to San Diego, like how exactly do you know which view you would love more, right? You actually need to see it, right? So I feel like maybe flight stuff could be. I can see like I'm indifferent. I don't have any preference for United or American Airlines or Delta, right? Actually, I do have preference for Delta because I use American Express Delta credit card, right? So,
Yeah.
but then again, the agent will know that I have American Express Delta card, and it'll probably prefer to book on Delta. So I understand how can be beneficial for me individually. But for accommodation and stuff, I feel like it is one layer away from that core disruption that we keep hearing about, how agents can actually usurp the whole sort of end-to-end experience. I do think, and we can get into it when we discuss Airbnb later. Airbnb is probably a bit more immune they have the more like a discovery element. Like it's actually
Yes,
pleasant, aesthetically
it's
pleasant
more
to.
because you need to have an aggregator for people who are renting out a spare room and that kind of thing.
Right.
It's not like those people have a dedicated site that an agent can interact with. And so
Yes.
I agree with your intuition that Airbnb is more insulated from that kind of risk. I also think like there's a point you were alluding to where it's true that booking one of the things that they're doing that someone like a Google may not want to are kind of back-end administrative tasks. So if you have a complaint or you have to modify a reservation, Booking will do that for you. Or if you get to the hotel and nobody's there, you would
Yeah.
contact Booking and Booking would try to
Right.
book you at a different hotel. So it'll play these customer support roles. But there's also this worry that an AI agent can theoretically take on a bit more, maybe not all of it, but a bit more of that than they did. And then if you combine that with like a new sort of payments medium, right, like an online native payments medium, then you can see how things can get quite existential for booking at this point.
Yeah.
And so I certainly don't have the answers here, but I think where I'm what I'm leaning towards is I think it would be premature for me to, freak out and dump all my booking shares
Yes. Right.
on this scenario. But it's
But something to
but
watch out for.
but something to monitor. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Can I talk a bit more about like the geographical mix of booking and basic just let's say margin structure?
Yeah, I mean, geographic mix. The way they disclose it, I don't know how helpful it is. So maybe it's like half of their revenue comes from Europe. They'll say like a
Hmm.
half from Europe, 25% from Asia, some low teens from the US, but that's where the guest is located. It's not like where the hotel is located.
An American who, let's say, is going to, let's say Germany during the
Right.
summer,
That's
and
US revenue.
that's
Yeah.
US revenue. Okay.
Yeah. So I think
I
what they
mean, your
say is
sense
like
is if it's more like, based on hotel or based on supply, let's say, it's actually more skewed to Europe than if it's based on guest.
almost certainly, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
they also say like Booking, Agoda, revenue from Booking, Agoda, and the non-US parts of like Open Table and Kayak, that is about 80, almost 90% of their revenue. And so I think it's probably fair to say that that revenue from bookings of European hotels and alternative accommodations, that's going to be probably like 80% of their revenue, would be
Wow.
my guess. It's going to be like the preponderance of their business.
Yeah, it's funny
Yeah.
because I think bookings management, I don't remember whether it's CEO or CFO or someone else, like in a recent like sell side conference or something like that, he basically mentioned if you go out and just talk to a random person in the US and ask about like, if you are traveling to, let's San Diego, uh, where would you go, right? Where would you go to kind
Yeah.
of book that? And this is a booking management. Basically, he was saying I'm pretty confident almost nobody's going to say booking.com.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So that's what it's pretty clear that they're not a big player in the US, but they do. And he was basically making the point. To me, that's an opportunity. That the fact that nobody says booking.com, that's an opportunity because that's the status quo. It's not like, things are getting worse. No, it's already,
Yeah.
that's the status quo. So if you can somehow improve it, that's the like in a bull case, right? So that's the point he was
Yeah,
making. But I thought that
it's
was
it's a
interesting.
much tougher market though, and I
For
think
sure.
because they face competition from the chain hotels, and then also Airbnb has got a pretty, a very strong position in alternative
Yeah.
accommodations
Yeah.
there, and so I think it's gonna be hard for them. I think I know they made a big push into the U.S. where they were talking about it, maybe I don't know 2 or 3 years ago or so. They talk about it less these days, so I don't know how
Huh.
well I feel like if it was going really well and they were taking a ton of share and all that, they'd be talking about it more. So make of that what you will.
Interesting. And they are
Yeah.
like 40% operating margin business, right?
Like mid
Mid
30s.
30s. Okay.
Yeah, mid 30s EBITDA, but I think they hit 40% like pre-pandemic at one point. And of course, that's after stock-based compensation.
Right, right, right. Yeah, and they do remind that to remind, during analyst calls that,
They're very
hey,
proud of
our
that.
numbers
Yes.
are not before, stock-based compensation. That's after. Yeah, and I think they also, I think mention almost every call now that they're actually growing faster than Airbnb, in the alternative accommodation segment. What percentage of their bookings comes from alternative accommodation these days?
I think right now it's like it's like high 30% at
High
this point.
30? Wow.
Yeah, and they have almost as many alternative accommodation room nights as um
Airbnb.
as Airbnb. Like so they've
Yeah.
got maybe a little bit over 400 million total room nights a year, and I think Airbnb's a little bit over 500 million. Uh if I'm getting
Yeah,
that right. And
500 million.
so
Yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
in the same ballpark, and Booking's alternative room nights are growing a bit faster as well. I think it's, low teens versus high single digits at Airbnb in recent quarters. And so
Yes, recent quarters. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I
so
think,
so it's in the ballpark as far as size goes, and they seem to be growing a bit faster as well. But of course, Booking's alternative accommodation, those are principally located in Europe, whereas
yeah.
Airbnb has a greater mix in North America. So
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to mention
yeah.
anything else about booking, or should we move to Airbnb?
No, I'm good with Airbnb. We could, I could, I will cede the floor to the Gen Z,
This is.
the Gen Z crowd. Oh, there's one thing I think I
Yeah.
didn't mention, which was you were asking about like supply and demand dynamics, which is kind of more important,
We'll come
I
back to it
guess.
because I think
Okay.
as I talk about Airbnb, frankly
Okay.
speaking, I get kind of confused about that particular point at times as well. And there's
Yeah.
some, stuff, strategic, direction that I see from Airbnb that also makes me a bit more confusing in answering that question, like which one is more important, the supply or the demand side of the
Yeah.
platform. But just to give you like a brief overview, obviously everyone knows about Airbnb. So they have 5 million hosts almost, and 5 million hosts, 8 million listings. But there are a lot of nuances beyond these numbers. So 70% of the listings, for example, is unique on Airbnb, roughly 70%. So these are the listings that's only available on Airbnb and not anywhere else. But even that, so the number I mentioned about like there are 5 million hosts. So they don't talk about these details every year or every quarter, but on their S1, they did have some interesting disclosures. So like they mentioned, so back then, during when they IPO'd, I think in late 2020 or maybe early 2021, somewhere around that time. So they mentioned they had like 4 million guests. So this is like, so now they have like five. They used to have four, 4 or 5 years ago. And of those 4 million, 2.8 million hosts were like, have only one listing, and zero point 0.8 million had like multiple listings. Now, there are three things that I really want to highlight when it comes to the hosts. Uh, so Airbnb mentions a lot how the individual hosts are the key to the ethos of Airbnb. Like they are the reason that the platform is differentiated, the marketplace is differentiated, right? So, and and they mentioned, like 90% of the hosts are individual hosts, right? So, of the 4 million hosts, like 3.6 million used to be individual hosts, so 90%, right? But I think the nuances that a lot of people miss is there are three kind of mix that I kind of think about when it comes to Airbnb. So the one is host mix, the other is listing mix, and the final is booking mix, right? So host mix, as I said, 90% is individual hosts and 10% is professional hosts, right? So their definition of individual host is basically anyone with three listings or fewer. So if you have three listings or fewer, you are individual host. If you have more than three, you are professional hosts, right? So 10% of the hosts were professional hosts, so more than three listings per host. But if 80% of the listing mix is actually individual hosts. So they're 90% of the hosts, but 80% of the listings. But
Mhm.
the final thing is the booking mix, right? So booking mix is in as in uh, uh, let's say if I have like a spare room, right? And I let's say from time to time I just put it on Airbnb, but I do it only few, I don't know, let's say weeks a year, right?
Mhm.
But if you're a professional host, you want to make it available throughout the year, right? So
Yeah.
there's a huge divergence in booking mix. So booking mix, for example, so 90% of hosts are individual hosts, 80% of the listings are individual hosts, but only 70% of booking is actually individual hosts, right? So
Mhm.
even though professional hosts are only 10% of the total hosts, they actually contribute roughly 30%,
30. Yeah.
right? And you know it's and again, like I think I did some math. Individual host has occupancy rate is like 15%, right? So of the total year, only 15% of the time their like property or rooms are occupied on a per year basis. uh, we don't have like data, obviously concrete data, what's the occupancy rate for the professional host on Airbnb, but we can guess. If you look at like Marriott, for example, their occupancy rate is like 70-75%, right? So obviously, if
Mhm.
you're a professional host, like I said, you want to maximize your occupancy rate versus individual hosts. You're just trying to rent it out and maybe make
Yeah.
some money. You're not really trying to maximize it. So that's like the host side.
Mhm.
And there are like two ways, I think. So one of my kind of thesis, not thesis, observations, I would say. This is not a thesis, but observation is basically, it feels to me inevitable that the farther I look out, it feels like Airbnb's booking mix is going to be more and more professional hosts and
Yeah.
less the individual hosts. Because already, I think, if you want to, so it's very hard to, so there are two ways you can avoid the dominance of the professional hosts on Airbnb. One is you can increase individual number of individual hosts. You can convince more people to make their property available on Airbnb, right? That's one way to do it. Other is basically you increase the occupancy rate of the existing individual hosts, right? And it's actually not easy to increase the occupancy rate, right?
Mhm.
Uh, uh, because they don't disclose it, but my understanding is it's somewhat stable, and it's not like increasing rapidly every year. So you basically you have to increase individual hosts on the
Yeah.
platform. And that's tricky if you are in the core markets. Obviously, there's already a lot of talk about regulations, like, concerns, how Airbnb is impacting housing supply, rent and housing prices, all sorts of things, right? Personally, I don't think that research is not compelling that Airbnb is directly affecting, in a material way. There's obviously some impact, but it's not material enough to really ban this sort of like supply. But again,
Yeah.
when it comes to regulation, when it comes to politics, it doesn't even have to be rational. They can, like, in New York City, for example,
So
banned short-term stay, and so this can happen in other markets as well. Uh, did you want to
I
mention?
I'll also, but I will also say though that outside of even aside from the mix, um, the overall experience of Airbnb has become more professionalized and standardized, I think, over time. Like when Airbnb kind of first started out, there was a lot of emphasis placed on making connections with the
Yeah.
host and community and all that kind of stuff. And I honestly can't remember the last time I booked an Airbnb where I even ran into the host. Usually it's here's the code to the door and call if there are any issues. It's a pretty like it's not a it's not a it's a process that feels a little bit more similar to like checking into a hotel these
Uh-huh.
days. And I think and I just wonder if this is the kind of business where it's possible to be like artisanal at scale. It's sort of like, can you be um, Etsy and Amazon at the same time, or do you have to make a choice
Yeah.
about who you want to be? And I sometimes want because there's a bit of I feel like there's like this conflict here where
Yeah.
And it's not just with their listings, it's also with the experiences now that they're trying to get into, where like you can offer mainstream undifferentiated experiences like a city tour or a tour of local wineries, that kind of thing, and you can scale, but you'll run into lots of problems with top of funnel competition for that stuff from Google today, and from AI agents tomorrow. Or you can offer very bespoke experiences that you can't get anywhere else but Airbnb, like celebrity workouts and cooking classes with Michelin star chefs, but those won't scale as well, and will cost a lot of money for participants. And so
Yeah.
I sometimes when I hear Brian Chesky, like, so there was recently a profile on Brian Chesky in Wired. And at one point, let me just read this little part of
Sure.
the article here.
Yeah.
At that point, Chesky gets a little woo. Magic, in hindsight, is not technology, he says, as he reflects on Apple's wizardry. What he's realized is that magic lies in forging connections with those who offer you a bed, a microdermabrasion, a sparring match in a lucha libre ring. The magic that is timeless is like the stuff you remember at the end of your life. And he also did an interview with Decoder today, where he said, he's still kind of harping on this theme of, creating a global community and whatnot. And I sometimes wonder, like, because it seems to me like Airbnb's kind of crossed the Rubicon when it comes to scale. Like there's a certain cookie cutter type of experiment that works, or experience that works when you're dealing with that kind of with these many room nights and these kind of gross booking numbers.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like Chesky is being tugged in almost the opposite direction, where he feels, he wants to maintain this very like intimate artisanal type of experience. And I don't know if these two things mix.
I do share some of the skepticism that you alluded to. I do try to be open-minded when it comes to some of the strategies that everybody is coming up with. As I was kind of mentioning in the beginning, that this company has actually, they have been told again and again and again and again that, hey, you are being stupid. Like people, he mentioned, when he was pitching Airbnb, like, in the seed stage, not only people hated the idea, they were actively repelled by the idea, right? Yeah, when I think about it, like even from imagine when I go back to like 2008 and Brian Chesky, let's say, coming to us and to kind of pitch the idea. I don't know about you. I think I would also be like actively repelled by the idea. Like, there's no way that's gonna work. Like, people are going to open their home to like a random stranger. Do you know what people, how people can be, right? So these people have been told, Brian Chesky is and the management team have been told again and again they're stupid. They don't know what they're doing, and they they, like I said, they came up with unique supply, unique demand on both sides of the platform. But I do want to echo some of the stuff that you said. I do also sense some disconnect. So, for example, what's the major complaint? And again, Brian Chesky knows about this. What's the major complaint about from Airbnb's, let's say, guests? Lack of consistency, right? That's the number one complaint. So, as you were saying, if you want to make it consistent, you have to kind of standardize. Okay, this is this is how I basically get into an apartment. This is the lock, key. Like, if it's kind of standardized, that actually makes it simpler for the guests to kind of get in and out in a new apartment, a new place, right? If it's very different in different, geography, different region, different city, actually that's more cognitively challenging. And the other thing is that one thing that I kind of disconnect, like Brian talks a lot about how he wants to create community and how he wants to have this connection between guest and the host, which basically he found when he started, and that's how the company basically originated. But the disconnect I see, if you are actually too close with your host, you would actually disintermediate Airbnb, right? You don't need to be on Airbnb. So I'll give an example. So I was talking to my brother. He was kind of the person who just started on like Google, never uses Airbnb. He's in Bangladesh, right? So he's not in the US. So he was visiting me last year. And we went to somewhere in California and basically rented an Airbnb. The whole family was there. And he loved it. He loved the experience. Now he's like a core Airbnb customer, right? And so he was visiting again this time, and he went to actually New York City. He was actually he was residing in New Jersey because New York City had all this regulation stuff. Like Airbnb is actually not doesn't have as many supply there, and they actually cooked for the host, and the host, had a dinner with them. The host loved it, and the host basically, face-to-face interaction, they said, uh, if you ever visit New York City, please stay at our place. You don't have to just WhatsApp me. You don't have to go to Airbnb, right? That's the disconnect. Like if you think about what Brian Chesky is imagining Airbnb to be, that's a global network and connecting people. Like if I'm really close with someone, if I trust a host, and if I go to that particular city, multiple times, why do I need to be on Airbnb? Like I know, I know there's like insurance stuff and all that. Those stuff is important. They are covered and the guarantee that Airbnb provides for both hosts and guests. Those things are helpful, super helpful if when you are strangers. But the moment, if you come visit me in Sacramento, right? You're my friend. Like you don't, if I know you, you know me. We don't need Airbnb. We can just directly, stay at each other's place, right? So I do think there's a bit of a disconnect. Again, this is not like a common problem. People usually don't visit the same place again and again and again, right? So it's not, disintermediation is like not in my, I don't know, top 20 list of risk I think about when it comes to Airbnb. I'm just giving an example to make the point that the kind of experience Brian Chesky imagines, right, Airbnb to be, actually doesn't make sense, right, to a large extent. The reason I choose Airbnb is, when I think about it from my personal perspective, okay, why do I prefer Airbnb over let's say Booking or Expedia or any other, hotel chains, for example? Well, like I do enjoy being in a residential area. It kind of makes you feel like you are part of the local. Of course, you are not, but still, I don't know. It does add to the character and experience of the place. So that's one. That's probably my number one. That's how I kind of got hooked to it. And then I do think it's much more aesthetically pleasing to discover places on Airbnb. If you go to Booking and Expedia, it's pretty clear those are boomer websites. It's not pleasing at all. I'm sorry. A great business is Booking, not a great website to explore. So I feel like I would actually have to click a lot more websites, a lot more listings to get to the place what I really enjoy versus Airbnb. I feel like really gets me quicker. And yeah, I'm in the US right now, right? So to me, it's a very easy decision to go to Airbnb. The real question is, do I go to Airbnb when I am visiting outside the US, right? So I'll give you another personal example. I once visited to Nepal, and to date, I would say that was my worst experience on Airbnb. Like the AC wasn't working, and it was very windy, and the host was not really available on the property. It was a mess, and I booked it for like a couple of days, I think, but I didn't even stay there fully. I went to a hotel the next day. And that's it's a real concern. I think if you, for example, I did find some really interesting stuff about like the geographical mix, for example, on Airbnb. So even though Airbnb feel, and I see it all the time. People I talk to, people I interact with, they all think Airbnb is a matured platform at this point. And obviously, the fact that they're not growing super fast, they're kind of making like high single digit gross bookings, revenue growth, or like even low double digit, kind of is a testament to that. Like it's probably becoming a more of a mature marketplace. I think people underestimate how much this platform is just 5 markets, right? It's basically US, Canada, Australia, France, and what else? Yeah, so UK. So only five markets: US, UK, France, Australia, Canada. That's 70 to 75% of their gross bookings. Only five markets, right? And then they talk about like the emerging markets, or let's say core plus, right? And they identify nine more markets. So Mexico, Brazil, from the Americas, Germany, Italy, Spain from Europe, and Korea, Japan, India, and China from Asia. All these nine markets is like today only 15 to 20% of revenue. They say that it's growing twice as fast, but again, twice as fast as core. But the core is not growing that fast, so it's not super impressive that it's growing twice as fast. But I do think there are some margin implications here. When I look at, let's say, what Airbnb is trading at, where Booking is trading at, I think people miss this perspective. A lot of investors and analysts that Booking is obviously very optimized, and they run with the efficiency and rigor that you expect of them. And obviously, there's also this perception, Airbnb is a sort of Silicon Valley company. There's not super tight, and there is some credence to that. I would say the fact that Brian Chesky keeps mentioning the story about how the performance marketing that they were running before the COVID, and they stopped it all. Now they're all just brand advertising, right? Chesky brags about it. I actually think, what do you mean that you are spending on this brand performance advertising, and you found out only after COVID that it wasn't working? Weren't you supposed to find it before the COVID? So to me, that is an indication that maybe the company wasn't run as as efficient, as tightly as it should have been. My guess is, it would not surprise me. I have to guess. I have to estimate. It would not surprise me if these core markets are as profitable or more profitable compared to Booking. And if you make that adjustment, then it becomes a lot more interesting, a lot more different than that kind of multiple that you see when you look at the because like I said,
I mean, certainly I think that like Chesky, I think a big thing with I mean, you're talking about how it's a classic Silicon Valley story and there's the branding and the stories around that. But there's also, I think it's easier to dream big when it comes to Airbnb. Nothing is more representative of that than these new than this new initiative to become more of a recurring super app and get more frequent usage. So this is kind of like the topic du jour, I think, and it's part of like why Brian Chesky is making the rounds, I think, and doing kind of this publicity blitz, is because he wants to point out. He wants to draw attention to this initiative.
I actually don't know anybody, to be very frank with you, that really believes the story that they're selling. Like, I know some VCs who tweet in agreement with Brian Chesky, whatever he's saying.
Yeah.
But I actually don't know any public market investor who thinks that experience and services have big potential. Everybody is skeptical, including me.
But well, let me just lay out what I think the issues are. I mean, I think anyone who's been, kind of unfortunate enough to be involved in Angie's and Upwork in the past.
Oh my God. Don't remind me.
I have my hand raised here. is going to be,
I'm a fellow victim.
They're going to immediately understand the issue of sourcing services through a marketplace on a recurring basis. And so let's just take Angie's. There's really two issues with that business model. And I wrote about some of this in a post from 2022, which is, first, I think from a consumer standpoint, I never really found it much more convenient to source a service provider through Angie's than I did through Google. And frankly, in many cases, I found it easier to just find a provider on Google. And then this, of course, then translates into, questionable returns for service providers who list on Angie's, right? And then the second issue, of course, is that once you find a plumber that you trust on Angie's platform, there's no need to keep returning to Angie's every time your sink clogs, right? So you just call the plumber directly. And so one question is like, why has like the marketplace model worked for Uber and not like Angie's and Upwork, right? Isn't Uber also providing a service as well? And I think for one, like a plumber, it's a full-time profession, whereas like driving for Uber, it's gig work. So if you're a plumber, you're already going to have a web presence. You're going to be tapping into other marketing channels. You'll have a listing on Google. You're going to be available from 9 to 5. There's no uncertainty as far as like business hours go. Whereas if you're, picking people up from the airport in your spare time, you're not going to have a dedicated web presence for that, right? You have
Yep.
to list on Uber or Lyft in order to be discovered. You need to have an aggregator to match your schedule with the schedule of riders. And second, I think like when there's um, a wide variance in the quality of the experience, and where the dollar amounts are involved are pretty significant. I think that's where you're also going to have a tough time
Yeah.
intermediating the relationship on a recurring basis. So if you take
Yep.
Uber, there's not a wide variance in experience. The job is to get from A to B. It's going to be pretty much the same regardless of the driver. But that's not true of like, a personal chef or a roofer. Like you care about who you pick in those cases. And once you've found someone, there's no reason to reshop the job every time and roll the dice and pay the marketplace fee. And it doesn't matter. And the key is it doesn't matter how good your app is, because this would always be like one of the lines that Angie would provide, right? Is that they just make the experience so simple for the consumer. It just doesn't matter. It won't be good enough that you're going to be willing to find someone new on the network every time versus going
Yeah.
direct to someone you trust.
Yep.
And so I feel like there are two different scenarios where you might access services on Airbnb. First is like on an ad hoc basis. So you're traveling to Paris, you rent an Airbnb for your family, and you want to hire a private chef for the weekend. Um, the second is that you want to access services on a recurring basis. You want a cleaner or a stylist or something to visit your residence every few weeks. Um, and I think from Airbnb's perspective, um, the ad hoc model still runs into the top of funnel challenges where you're competing uh, with Google for searches, unless you're talking about some very bespoke thing like a celebrity chef doing like a private lessons, private cooking lessons or something like that. And then I think the recurring model runs into both issues. You've got like the top of funnel challenge, and then you've got the disintermediation challenge. So yes, I kind of share this consensus view that's tough, and I don't I'm like personally curious just like how much energy and time and resources um management's willing to put behind this, like it, because they seem pretty serious about it. It doesn't seem like one of these small
Yeah.
like side opportunities that they're just kind of exploring. It seems like they're kind of making like an all out bet on this. What I will say on Airbnb's behalf is that um one, they've built a robust identity and
Yes.
review system that I think
Yep.
like lowers the risk of transacting with strangers. So that's one thing. And that's important because you're letting people into your home with some of these services. And the second thing is that it can cross-sell services at the moment of the booking, right? It can say, so when you book your room, it'll say, add a private chef to your stay and that kind of stuff, right? And it has all your relevant info already, your group size, your dates, location, all that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
So there's maybe like that angle, but I see it more um, as like an incremental ARPU opportunity on the core booking. So like you book a room in Paris, maybe you'll hire a private chef and it adds to the revenue that booking gets. What I don't see it as though is the next, multi-billion dollar revenue stream where you're using it on a recurring basis. I don't even think this would be worth talking about if the company
Yeah.
just kind of said it in passing, but they
Yeah.
just
So
make such a big deal out of it.
that's true. Like, that's why I was mentioning, like, most of the Airbnb shareholders that I know or I interact with, almost, almost none of them is quite convinced, and they are shareholders, which kind of shows that they don't really care about the success or failure of experiences or services. I'm more skeptical about services and probably more optimistic about experiences. Again, experience is something they have kind of, already launched in 2016. I think
Yeah.
Brian again is encouraged by the fact that he actually launched the core Airbnb service 3 times, right? So he always said like if the first time didn't work, you can always relaunch it, right? So I think he's staying true to his words. He keeps relaunching experiences every few years, and so this is probably
Yeah,
third
and
time.
by the way, Booking has also tried that. Like
Yeah.
experiences is kind of the white whale that everyone has tried, and nobody has been able to um, to to make work.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I am more optimistic about experiences, again, I'm not sure whether the optimism means that it can be $1 billion revenue. Uh, I don't know whether it can be $1 billion revenue, but I think it can be incremental to the overall experience on Airbnb. So, for example, like I was mentioning before, they did create new type of travel experience. So, for example, they mentioned uh, 12 to 15% of their so it's I think mid-teens of their total bookings is basically 28 plus days, right? So if you are in a region or in a city for 28 plus days, like you actually at one point you may think, hey, let's see whether there's what stuff I can do. If you're only there for like 2 days, 3 days, you're probably too packed, and you actually can figure out stuff to do for 2 days.
Yeah.
That's actually easy to do. But if you're in a city for like 28 plus days, right? Then I think you may actually run out of things to do, and Airbnb can come into the into this context to help you figure out stuff, figure out things to do in the city. So that's one. Also, they mentioned like I think half of the 60% of booking on Airbnb is actually in non-urban areas, and 75% of the listings are outside the areas where big hotels are located, where big hotels are not located, right? So again, like if you think about those stuff, if you are in those cities where there is no big hotel chains, non-urban areas, maybe Airbnb can help you to figure, again, if you are there for 7 plus days, 28 plus days, right? I think if you think 7 plus days is like probably almost a significant percent. I forgot the exact number, but it's a significant percentage of their total stay. So this is not a behavior shown by travel behavior shown by, let's say, people who stay on hotels, right? You don't really stay on hotel for 7 plus days or 28 plus days. A lot rarer than it is on Airbnb. So that's why I think Airbnb experiences can be a nice attach rate, for the existing like core customers. Services is a very different ballgame. They are kind of trying to enter a completely different sort of market here.
Do you have a sense of like why experiences didn't work then the first time for Airbnb, and what it has like Brian Chesky said why it's going to work this time? Why he thinks what's changed?
I'll tell you one kind of funny observation that I have. Like Brian Chesky talks a lot about how he wants Airbnb, like how he designs Airbnb to be Apple, right? And how Apple and Steve Jobs is basically his idol, right? And there's definitely some positive aspects to it, like the fact that Airbnb is so aesthetically pleasing, like design on all that, definitely comes from that sort of like idolatry of how he wants Airbnb to be. But at the same time, he runs a marketplace company, and there are some I think tensions to what extent you can really control the experience, right? So the fact that experiences, for example, even in this relaunch, he wants to handpick, right? He wants to yeah, this meets the bar for for you to be on Airbnb experience, right? I don't know. I feel like
Yeah, I think that's just the wrong. I just don't think that they should be so precious about it. Like it's like throw up, yeah, like include a walking tour of
I
the
mean, just
city.
trust the
Like,
market,
just put it
dude.
all
Like,
up there, right?
if something doesn't work out, the host will not host it anymore, right?
Yeah,
Or
right.
the people who are trying to start, like, they will just not do it anymore, right? And again, like, how do you know like which stuff is going to be going to work much better? It's a marketplace. Like, let the market figure it out. Like, you don't need to really play that game. Like, oh, this like meets the bar. Again, this is like an Apple-like tendency. Like Apple also has an
Right.
app store and all that, but they also want to gate the experience, right? Then again, it definitely worked out for Apple, right? So maybe that's how they're kind of, encouraged by it. Uh, to me, it feels like, and Brian Chesky shits on like, the double-decker bus around Paris and all that. If I've never been to Paris. If I go to Paris, I might do it. what's so wrong about it? Like, it's an efficient way to kind of just look around the city, right? So I feel like, he's a bit on the high, on his high horse there. Let the market decide. And I think that would make, if he just trusts the market.
Yes. You need like they're a massive marketplace at this point. Like have as much supply as you can, right? I wouldn't limit myself to, these very precious experiences like, whatever sharing an alpaca or something. Like just put the double-decker bus on there.
So let's go back to the key question that I had. What matters more, demand or supply? And I just want to give a bit more context where my confusion comes from. So on Airbnb, the hosts pay, if you're an individual host, you pay like 3% fee, which is basically just payment transactions, right? So essentially, effectively, you could say it's free for the individual hosts, right? And the guests basically pay somewhere between 6 to 14%. Nobody knows exactly what the formula is, but we know if you stay there for a long period, for 28 plus days, the fee is usually lower. And so there are like variables like that. But on the other hand, if you're a professional host, so if you are like, connecting Airbnb through an API, you actually pay 15%. So you don't get the 0% fee that individual hosts pay to Airbnb. Now, the thing is, when I think about just this dynamic, I feel like Airbnb thinks aggregating the unique supply is much more important and existential for them. And that kind of makes sense in the sense that, okay, if there is no unique supply on Airbnb, then it's just another OTA, it's just another website, another platform like Booking and Expedia. If Booking, Expedia, and let's say Airbnb have all the exact same supply, right? Then, like, what's really differentiating factor? Like, then the game kind of moves to a different dimension.
No, I think that's no, it's interesting. Well, let me try maybe drawing a few comparisons. Like I think with something like Uber, right? I think it's got to be supply that the company's probably more focused on here, just because, well, for a few reasons. Like, one, the density of drivers in a given territory in and of itself creates a better product because driver density means shorter wait times. But also, like with Uber, the supply of drivers is kind of this amorphous and malleable thing, and attracting the drivers economically and keeping them happy is this ongoing battle, right? Whereas with hotels, the supply is fixed, right? You can in theory know, like Booking can in theory know where all the hotels are in Europe, and you can just go out there and try to sign them up. And so I know that early on, Booking was very much supply focused, right? But after a certain point, the emphasis shifted more to the demand side because eventually, like, it just gets harder and harder to differentiate on supply. And when supply is fixed, hotels will be more willing to allocate their rooms to you if you fill those rooms better, which means you need to focus on conversion. And so, yeah, like, I mean, when I think about all the irons that like Booking has got in the fire right now and where they're spending their time and their resources and their R&D, it's mostly on the demand side. It's like AI trip planners. It's like the connected travel thing, the loyalty
it is pretty
program.
clear in my mind when it comes to Booking, they care about aggregating demand. Like you said, they basically already kind of aggregated the supply. They don't care about like they don't care as much about the incremental hotel that's out there.
And I think of Airbnb as being somewhere in between, like where like maybe Uber and Booking is. Like I think Airbnb probably cares more about the supply side, spends a lot more attention there than Booking does, for example.
Yeah, so like I said, Booking, it's pretty clear. They, so they do provide a lot of discounts in a membership, points, loyalty programs for the guests. So they know the bottleneck is the demand. So they want to aggregate the demand, right? It only gets confusing when I think about Airbnb because the hosts are basically paying nothing in this transaction. So in some sense, it feels like Airbnb thinks they have enough demand because the end consumers are basically paying to Airbnb, and they're kind of I know, like I've listened to some expert network calls, and they basically mentioned the way the network works and marketplace works. There's like an ebb and flow. So there are times of the year when they have ample supply and when they have not as much supply, right? But obviously the business model is fixed. It's not like it goes up and the fee structure goes up and down based on where the demand and supply is. Personally, I feel like that would be much better, elegant way to kind of deal with this. Like who pays what? Like if you are going to Italy during the summer, obviously you probably don't have enough supply, right? There's enough demand. And in that case, if a particular city or market is just completely lopsided demand and supply situation, maybe it's not the customers who need to pay the Airbnb, it's the suppliers who need to pay the Airbnbs to generate the demand,
and
right?
that's what I mean by like I think I don't think you can make a clear-cut case in Airbnb, which is more like I think because like Uber, like the supply of people who have bedrooms to rent and that kind of thing, it's more amorphous than just like targeting
Right.
hotels, right? And
Right.
so I think it is an ongoing challenge. I think that's kind of the key thing to get the supply demand balance right, right? And I think that booking, I think as you were saying, it's a little bit more clear cut at this point. Well, a lot more clear cut that the
Yeah.
demand side is what the focus is. I think it's blurrier when it comes to something like Airbnb and Uber. Like
Yeah, I
my
mean,
sense is that Uber, they spend a shitload of time on
for
the
sure.
supply side,
Yeah.
and
No, I
getting
think
that
for
part right.
Uber, it happens on a daily basis. Like there are peak hours, there are off-peak hours. So and again, they are kind of they can actually charge higher, like
Yes.
during the peak hours and all that. So one of the things that kind of so I do have, if Branches, if you're listening, I do have a product idea for you, which is, to me, I think. So 90% of traffic to Airbnb is organic, right? So they are literally generating demand organically. And I think the professional hosts, uh, they need to pay for it more, not just 15%, actually probably potentially more. And how can Airbnb uh, extract some of the value of the fact that they are generating demand organically? I think the way I kind of envision it, so they talk about advertising product, like and Branches K has usually vetoed that idea, like, oh no no no, I don't want to kind of degrade the consumer experience, search experience, and only recently in the recent earnings call or two, it appears he is more receptive to the idea. He said it's a question of uh, when, not if, right? And my guess is, I was thinking, okay, what could be an advertising product on Airbnb? I think the way I kind of think about it, if I search, let's say I want to go to San Diego 2 weeks from now, and I think all the organic search results should be individual hosts, only individual hosts. Anyone who is professional host, they need to bid for that top, let's say one or two listings, and those will be paid. You need to they need to be sponsored. So the professional hosts, basically, they are fighting against each other to get to the top, and all the organic results, every single organic results are basically individual hosts, unless they run out of supply. They run out of inventory. That okay, I don't have any professional, individual hosts left who meet this search criteria that this person is looking for. Then you can kind of uh, show people more professional host listings. But that's the idea that I have. Like if, for example, 10 years down the line, I do think it's highly likely that today is 30% professional hosts. It's probably going to be 50% in 10 years down the line, professional hosts. And let's extract more money from this professional host who is basically just paying 15%, who basically is doing nothing. They're using API to kind of be available everywhere, right? Now, the only pushback that I can think of to this proposal, is it possible that these professional hosts can choose not to be on Airbnb.
Yeah, not if Airbnb has all the demand. I think that's when things start shifting
Right.
over into the
Exactly.
demand side. And if people are coming to Airbnb for the unique supply that others platforms can't match, then um, professionals won't have any option but to also be on Airbnb. Right?
Yeah. I think this is, I just want to probably uh, provide a bit more color on their operating structure to make people understand what I'm talking about when it comes to like why the margin that Airbnb basically posts, I think is noticeably masked by their spending on other markets. So, for example, let me see. So they have like 82 billion gross booking value last year. They had like 13.6% take rate. Like I said, 3% paid by a host. The rest is basically the guest. Uh, and so, yeah, so that's like 11 billion revenue last year. They had 83% gross margin, right? Which is a 9 billion gross profit. Now, they also have operations and support, which is 1.2 billion. The real gross profit is basically 8 billion after you consider the operations support. This is also a line item where AI can help a lot, like I was mentioning before. And I think it's
Yeah.
already, they're already getting some scale benefits. So, for example, in 2019, operations and support was like 17% of the revenue. And last year, it was like, I think, 11.5. So there's already a lot of scale benefits that they're enjoying. I think there's room to go because they have basically done this without basically much of the help of AI, right? So they're only starting to utilize AI in a more major way. So I think there's more room to like get leverage here. So
Yeah.
you have 8 billion gross profit last year. They spent 2 billion on R&D. Booking has like no line item at all, right? So 2 billion
It's
R&D for
somewhere in the personnel expenses or something. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
So Airbnb has $2 billion R&D and $2 billion, sales and marketing, right? And there's some interesting stuff here on the sales and marketing. So 60 to 70% of their revenue comes from repeat customers. And the funny thing is, obviously, back in 2017 to 2019, Airbnb used to spend like similar sales and marketing as percentage of gross profit as booking. So in 2017-2019 period, I think they used to spend like 40 to 45% of their gross profit. Expedia spends 60 to 65% of, it's basically a Google subsidiary at this point. They just give all their money to Google, right? Expedia. Now it's like, they spend 2 billion, which is like, I think, high teen percentage of the revenue. And most of it is basically brand advertising, right? Not like performance advertising, because they basically generate all their organic traffic. And they have 1 billion G&A. So that gives you like $2.5 billion operating profit, gap basis, not like the stupid SBC stuff, right? Which is like low to mid 20s, let's say EBIT margin, operating profit margin. Now, when I make some adjustments there, I notice it's certainly possible. It's 2.5 billion of the overall company's profit. When I make some adjustment, I think it's quite reasonable to think the core market that they have, which is 75% of the revenue, that
Yeah.
70% revenue basically generates $3 to $3.5 billion of profit. And they basically lose money in kind of, creating that flywheel that they already have in a core market. So all those 9 other markets that I mentioned, the emerging markets and rest of the world, right? Everyone is everywhere. They're spending money there. It's hugely unprofitable. So the core market is basically $3 to $3.5 billion operating profit, and this company is what, like $80 billion market cap. You take out $10 billion cash that they have, so like $70 billion enterprise value, right? And you start seeing like, okay, this is not as expensive as you used to think. Like, so, but again, like, this is a difficult business, and everyone is playing on a very hard mode here. Like a lot of the actually the guests who go to different let's say countries. This when I was going to Nepal, I was booking on Airbnb because I'm used to Airbnb in the US, right? And this sort of behavior, like it really happens very gradually. The the experience of the American travelers or European travelers who are used to Airbnb when they go to Asia or let's say Latin American countries, they stay on Airbnb. Then the hosts get kind of familiar with it, and even a lot of the guests uh, later become hosts. I think 36% of their Airbnb hosts actually were guests first, and then they became hosts, right? And that number is also gradually increasing. But again, it's a very slow kind of osmosis, right? Obviously, then the counter would be, then why is the market is not growing as fast? But I think it's kind of a lightning in a bottle. Because it's two-sided marketplace. You need the hosts and you need the kind of demand, organic demand, right? So it may take a while. Because North America and EMEA was like 80% of their revenue in like 5-6 years ago. Today is like 83%. So you can say, hey, it's not working. They're trying to make these markets work, like this in this core market, it's kind of not working. So it kind of remains to be seen, but I think that's a big opportunity if they can if this is a global behavior. And I can't really articulate in a compelling way why this, let's say, Western norm of making our property available for strangers will not travel to Asia, will not travel to Korea, will not travel to Japan or Germany, right? Or Brazil, right? I can't really articulate. So to me, it's more likely than not that it will travel, but it will probably it's just taking a lot more time.
Yeah. 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 Well, let's see. You own, do you own Airbnb still
Yes,
or?
I do.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks to Donald Trump, during that fated liberation, liberation day or week, whatever you call it. Yeah, I think I bought it at enterprise value of what, 60 billion. Uh,
Yeah.
so so yeah, I own it. I'm open to owning Booking as well. I was surprised when I was first looking at Airbnb. I think Booking and Airbnb had same market cap, which was crazy,
Uh-huh.
right? Today
Yeah.
it's what, like, so Airbnb has $70 billion market cap, sorry, $70 billion EV, and Booking is like I think 180 billion,
Yeah.
right?
Something like
So,
that. Yeah.
so yeah, the
Yeah.
market has kind of okay, they woken up to the fact that they probably uh, you know they probably get the narrative value of Airbnb a bit too much.
Yeah. And yeah, so it'll be exciting to see what happens over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you
let's
want to
see.
be 35 years old and or lower, come back to and be a shareholder of Airbnb. You can just reduce your age by, I don't know, 8-10 years.
Exactly. That's yes. All right, cool.
Okay.
I'm gonna press stop here.